presentation of the 2013-2014 millage rate. Dr. Michael Bell, he's our Chief Financial Officer in the Division of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Mr. Chairman, board members, appreciate this opportunity to have the second millage rate hearing on the millage rate that will be applicable to the FY 2014 budget. What is being handed out now, and y'all have seen it before, is the 5-year ad, which under Georgia law we ran in the legal organ a few weeks ago. Also, we've included the consolidated budget sheet with the final changes as voted on the 26th relative to a budget adoption. The 5-year ad indicates at the levy of 23.98 mills, and that's what, of course, was our direction and your direction to us, is to structure this budget assuming no millage rate increase. The good news is that we still feel confident that the 23.98 mills will bring in adequate revenue to fund the voted on budget. However, as you have heard me say before, that there will be thousands of appeals, and there are thousands of appeals in process relative to digest values that all the tax assessor's office are having to process throughout the state right now. And that's because the law this year dictates that everybody who owns property will get a statement of value if it's up or down or the same. I was discussing with Mr. Thurman transmission we got from the tax assessor's office at about 12:21 today. At 12:21 today, the tax assessor's office in DeKalb County sent out to the county, us, all the cities, an indication that they had a flag in their software misplaced when they were producing the consolidated values, and that they had reported the DeKalb Development Authority value at its full value and did not reduce it down to a net assessed status, or, as you know, for some economic development transactions, there's some tax-exempt components, okay? We got this about 12:30 and took the information and have analyzed it, and it will have an impact on us. Our best estimate right now, using pretty exact data, is that the impact could be around $2 million. So where we're projecting best case 385, 390, when we incorporate into their exact values those development authority issues, okay, we could come down $2 million. Now, it is possible that these appeals that are being processed can go $2 million to the good. So there are a lot of moving parts in it. It's not all bad news, but this is, just on a pure mathematical basis, does indicate that we'll have some impact. And I think because they sent it to all the cities, as they should have, and to the county, et cetera, it'll probably be reported somewhat. So all of that being said, you know, I think we still have a good millage rate at the 23.98. We still feel confident it's going to fund everything, and hopefully we'll have something of a growth cushion as we predicted in the beginning.
Thank you, Dr. Bell. Is there any discussion? Mr. Mayfield.
Yeah, I have about 3 questions. They're sort of broad questions, so not necessarily specific to the presentation, but about the millage rate. And the first one is whether or not there is a list of specific primary factors that drive or trigger a decision to adjust the millage rate from your point of view.
Mr. Board Member Mayfield, what drives traditionally the decision for the administration to request from the governing body a change in the millage rate, a number of factors, but there are 3 or 4 that occur. If I was sitting here saying that we had a substantial growth in the fund balance and we're above our target, then naturally elected officials will say, well, can't you reduce the millage rate and use up some of that? to stay within targeted fund balance. Okay, that's not been the case for years, and I don't think it's going to be the case for a number of years to come. Okay, if we were still in a building boom and the digest had grown, okay, let's say the digest had grown 6% or something like that, there's a form that the state of Georgia makes us fill out. It's called a PT 32-1, and that form produces the rollback rate. If the digest had grown 6%, let's say the rollback rate at the bottom of that form would come in at a 22.4 mils. What that form is telling us is if we don't roll back from the 23.98 to 22.4, and this is usually the hypotheticals, then we have to run an ad in the paper saying, notice a property tax increase. Even though you could roll back the rate, okay, but if you don't go all the way to the rollback rate, then you're going to be collecting some more money because of revaluation, growth in the digest, okay? So the economic conditions of your ad valorem values, okay, the funded level of your fund balance, okay, or if the budget is reduced a substantial amount, then you can say you don't need all of that millage rate, okay? So those are sort of the general conditions in Georgia where you have to modify or should consider modifying your millage rate.
The follow-up to that is whether or not there are any leading indicators to those factors that we monitor that would help us anticipate whether or not we might project a need to adjust the millage rate.
The tax assessor's office in the county produces, beginning about 2 months ago, iterations of their consolidation reports. The whole set will be 52 pages, and there's 2 or 3 pages in there relate to the Board of Ed. The rest are the cities, Atlanta, DeKalb. We get those numbers, and then we get communications from the assessors. And these are skilled professional people that do this for years. And they say, well, we have 27,000 appeals. We think our numbers are accurate. Just be aware that we're going to have a level of appeals that is going to be overwhelming. It's going to take us, it could take us more than 1 year to process the appeals. So we get, as we go through time, these reports. Georgia law says that at a certain point prior to your vote tonight, we have to run the ad, the 5-year millage rate history ad. So I have to pick a point and grab the information, talking to people and say, I'm going to use this. I'm going to put this in the paper, recognizing it's going to move a little bit, okay? So then we run it in the paper, and we have the hearings, okay? There is a lot of information, but everybody puts a footnote on it saying it could change. And today at 12:21, we got a communication saying, yes, there was some error, quite honestly, in what was done. Now, relative to a $16 billion net digest, it's 80, what was the number, $84 million movement, okay? So it's not like it's a big percentage of it, but it does have a financial impact.
Final question, which you may have spoken to some of this, in fact you did, and that was whether or not we have a process that we use internally to monitor those major factors. You mentioned getting a notice 12 o'clock today, and that sounds like, you know, something obviously that would be an anomaly, I'm assuming. And so for those other factors, do we have a process to monitor to help us anticipate as far in advance as we can what those adjustments might need to be?
Yes, sir. When the budget is being constructed at the direction of the superintendent, okay, you know, the superintendent will indicate to the staff, I'm hearing we should not change the millage rate. I'm hearing there is some flexibility, et cetera, okay? We go back and we get on the phone with the tax assessor's office, the tax commissioner's office. We talk to other jurisdictions around the county, and we ask them, what do you see? What are y'all estimating? Da-da-da-da-da. So it's kind of a group effort, okay? Recognizing that over the last 4 or 5 years, it's been traumatic in the sense that you had these great drops in digest value all over Metro Atlanta and all over the country, okay? We think we've hit the bottom and we're starting to come up. Let's hope. I think we're seeing some signs to that effect, okay? So it's kind of a group kind of effort as we talk to one another. Now, if the finance director in the county says he's predicting a 3% decline, that doesn't govern us. We can predict a 5% decline or a 2% decline, and it's a consensus thing. But we constantly, and we give this information to the superintendent, and as we move forward, we build a consensus.
Additional questions?
Thank you.
Question here.
Mr. Campbell.
Thank you. Dr. Bell, I come out of an industry that we do very similar, that you have to project a revenue factor and hope that everything hits. Do you have what's the accuracy, what measure of accuracy do we have here in DeKalb County? I know this is subjective with some adjustments made to it. How accurate have we been in the last 3 years, if you had to just guess, with this millage rate? I know it's not 100%, but when you think about revenue shortfalls and what have you, how would you measure the accuracy that we've had in the last 3 years? Can you?
Looking at the data from the last 3 years, I'd say, on the revenue side, Mr. Board Member, we're accurate in the 90-plus percentile. Where we got in trouble here is on the expense side, we overspent substantially our budget. Okay? And so if your revenue is accurate and you overexpend $30, $40, $50 million on the expense side, it's going to eat up any good news you might have on the revenue side. Okay, that seems to be what I see from looking at the prior audits. Now, and let me just say another thing. It's not just property values. We collect money off of alcohol sales. We get 42.7% of what the county collects. So if people party more, we get some more money. Okay? All right? There is an intangible recording tax. If real estate changes hands more, we get some off of it when they go to the clerk's office and transfer property and stuff. We get a piece of that. We don't have all the multiple revenue sources that a general county has, but there are other things that can impact us, of course, on the revenue side. On the budget side, as you know, the cost of fuel. If the state of Georgia increases its required premium for medical coverage, which it did this year to the tune of about $12 million, that impacts us substantially on the expense side and for retirement purposes.
One follow-up question, if you will. Knowing that the revenue forecast is a guesstimate for the most part, and you talked about controlling expenses, are you looking to implement any contingent budget that says for the first 3 months, 6 months, as a safeguard, this is how we can address the expense side? Because I know the revenues are just kind of forecasted revenues. Any safeguards that you can put in place that may help us with budget, mid-year budget, interim budget at some point in time?
Well, Mr. Board Member, I wouldn't agree with your characterization as a guesstimate. The revenue projections is here, as in a lot of the big governments, is substantially well-informed trend analysis. It's not a forecast, but it's a trend analysis which produces a projection, and we do it working with a lot of other professional offices in the county, okay? My position right now, and I've talked to Mr. Thurman about this briefly, is I want to keep the brakes on as we go into the first quarter relative to processing expenditures, the P-card process, and that type of thing, until we have at least a quarter, maybe more, under our belt to see how our projections are taking place.
And I apologize, with a 90% accuracy, I would say that's more than a guess, so I do apologize to you.
Just one quick comment.
Dr. Irwin.
And Dr. Bell, I remember you speaking at the last meeting, but your conservative estimates should help with that and help insulate us from predictive revenue, right?
Well, it's yours and mine. Okay. Yeah, I mean, based on the posture we're in now, you need to be conservative on your revenue estimates and aggressive on your expenditure estimates. And if both of those come true, when you get to the end of the year, the impact of both of those should add to your fund balance. Okay. And so we just got to hold to that. But again, another factor sort of out of our control is the economy seems to be improving. That's going to be very important for people going out, and it's going to be very important for the sales tax. Because a part of our capital program, a big part of it is that SPLOS, okay? So you want folks to spend their money, spend it here in DeKalb, and you want them to have a home of greater value.
Question? If no further questions, now it's time for public comment.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to present to you the distinguished CFO, Dr. Michael Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Johnson, Mr. Superintendent Thurman, and board members. As was stated, this is the third and final millage rate hearing on the adoption of the recommended mill for O&M, the only mill that we operate on, of 23.98 mills. As you will recall, in the previous hearings, we referenced the 5-year ad, which under Georgia law we have run in the district's legal organ. If you take a look at that document, it shows that we've had a drop in revenue anticipated from ad valorem taxes of, in 2008, of $505 million to where we were a couple of weeks ago at the 2398 mills of $390 million. I did relate during the work session some news we received officially from the tax assessor's office today that they are reworking some of the values that everybody was sent, the county and all the cities and us, relative to property owned by the DeKalb Development Authority, that will have some downward impact. We estimate about $2 million on our anticipation in relation to the monies that we intend to collect relative to the 23.98 mills. So with that being said, we've been through this discussion before. I think this will be the third and final millage rate hearing. After this hearing, there's an agenda item to request the board to adopt the levy of 23.98 mills, and we will send that on to the levying authority so the tax bills can be put together. I'll take any questions that you might have at this time.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Bell.
Before we take the vote to adopt the millage rate, I would like to acknowledge the fact that we did not have any citizens that wanted to make a comment relative to the millage rate. But do we have anyone in the audience that would like to make a comment at this time? I would acknowledge that. If not, at this time I would call for a motion to adopt the millage rate